see if that works.
Oh, great. It's working now.
Hey, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me well? Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so my name's Nick Bilbrough. I'm the author of 2 Cambridge Handbooks, Dialog Activities and Memory Activities for Language Learning. And I'm also the founder and the coordinator of a project which fits in very well with what Ben and Kerry were talking about, which is the idea of developing global citizens. So I run a project called the Hands Up Project, and this project works with children in refugee camps in Palestine, in Gaza, and in occupied Palestine, and also children, Syrian refugee children in Jordan, in refugee camps in Jordan. And as we are live streaming this event, I've shared this on Facebook in the Palestinian groups that I work with. So I'd like it if we could all just say hello to anyone who's watching online, but particularly to children and teachers who may be watching from Palestine. So could we all just turn around and say a big hello? I think we have to face that way. Fantastic. Okay, so every picture tells a story. When Andrea got in touch with me, where's Andrea? Is she here?
Somewhere.
She's somewhere.
Probably downstairs.
She's downstairs. When Andrea got in touch with me and said the theme for the conference is about stories, and we'd like you to incorporate a story into your presentation, then I was kind of a bit torn. Not because I don't have any stories, but really because that's all I have. Story is a massive part of the way that I teach, and it's a massive part of the way that I train teachers. Actually, I think it's probably a huge part of the way that all of us teach. Mario Rinvolucri called storytelling the oldest teaching technique in the world. People have been telling stories in educational contexts since the beginning of time. And it's certainly been used by every major religion as a way of getting ideas across in a very accessible way. So I'm going to start with some personal stories about education. And I'd like to start by going to, I need my mover honor. I'd like to start by showing you this picture. If I can get it to work. Is it turned on? Yeah. So this is a picture of my primary school. It's kind of like my last days at primary school when I was 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if anyone can spot which one is me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk very slowly this way, and when you think there's somebody who looks like me, shout out stop. Okay? I'm going to give you a clue. It isn't anyone in the top row. Those are all girls. It's working now. It's on. Okay. So, yeah? This one? Keep going. This one? No. Keep going. This one? No. This one? No, it's actually this one. This is me. I think pretty much the same, no? A few small changes, maybe. So this was my primary school, and I could tell you some quite sad stories, really, about my primary school. Because I had a teacher at my primary school who was a little bit eccentric, and he had some really quite nasty punishments that he used to inflict on us. There were 2 which were particularly bad. One was that he would ask us to copy out page 99 of the Bible, which apparently is the longest page in the Bible. So we had to just sit down and copy it out. But there was a worse punishment than that, and that was that we had to go out onto the school field and get down on our knees and count the blades of grass on the school field while everyone else watched us. And it was an incredibly humiliating experience. Luckily, I only had to do it once. I could also tell you some really kind of happy stories. I could tell you about Alison Close, who's up there, fourth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the row. Now, I had a huge crush on Alison Close when I was 10 years old. I would go so far as to say that I was in love with Alison Close. And I've never told her this. So if she happens to be in the audience, or she's listening online, I'd like to tell you now that I was in love with you then, but I've moved on. Yeah? Actually, interestingly, I was also in love with Alison Close's mother, who was a dinner lady at the school. She used to serve us our dinners, and she looked very much like her daughter. And I can remember thinking, if Alison asked me to marry her, or her mother asked me to marry her, I don't know which one I would choose. It's difficult. I could also tell you some stories about my son, and my son's education. Now, my son was actually born here. Not in São Paulo, but he was born in Brazil. We lived in a small village near Porto Alegre called Viamão. And this is 22 years ago. And this is our garden. And here's André as a baby. He had these really chubby cheeks. And I think it was a wonderful experience for André in terms of his education to be born in Brazil. Because I think Brazil is a wonderful country to be a child in. I can remember being on a bus journey, a long bus journey from Porto Alegre to Rio. And André sat on every person's knee on the bus. He was passed around between everyone. And I always remember that. I mean, I think that's a lovely thing about Brazil, that I'll always remember that if you're walking down the street with a baby, people will stop and talk to the baby. In England, they do it if you've got a dog. They don't do it with a baby, they do it if you've got a dog, which is a strange kind of thing. So I always sort of miss that. So André grew up. When he was 2, we left Brazil and we went back to living in England. And he went to school, he started going to school, and I remember he had a kind of interesting experience at school. When he was about 5, the teacher asked the children to do a drawing of anything they liked. And André drew a head of a person, he drew the ears, and he drew the hair and the neck. And the teacher went over to him and said, "Wow, that's a lovely drawing." But he said, she said, "You haven't drawn the eyes and the nose and the mouth. Are you going to draw the eyes and the nose and the mouth?" And André said, "No, because I've drawn the person from behind." And I thought that was an interesting sort of quite philosophical comment to come out with as a child. And indeed, André went on to study, and he's just graduated in philosophy at Glasgow University. Now, all of those stories that I've told you, they're not really stories, they're just simple little anecdotes, really. When I was talking to you, you probably used the images that I showed you to connect the language that I was using to the images. You were probably kind of hanging the language on the images. And as well as that, you were probably also creating your own images in your minds. I imagine. So, for instance, when I talked about my teacher, or when I talked about Andre's teacher, you were probably imagining, you had some kind of image of what the teacher was like, or you may have imagined what the school was like, or you may have imagined the garden in Viamont, or all these different things. So this is what this presentation is about. It's about image, and it's about how, when we're teaching a language, image is a very powerful thing for, if we use images that are already created, it's a very powerful way for learners to connect language and to remember language. But the presentation is also about getting learners to create images in their minds, and also about drawing images. So it's going to be quite a practical presentation. We're going to do several activities. Now, recently, the idea of learning styles has come under a lot of criticism. You know, this auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, visual learners, olfactory learners, people who learn through smell, where we have to take smelly things into the class for them. So people have criticized this idea because they've said it's too simplistic to put people into boxes and say, you're like this. And also the reality of most classes is that they're very large, and it's very difficult to have differentiated activities for everyone in the class. But there is one thing that we do know for sure about style of learning, and that is that all of us have an ability to remember images which exceeds our ability to remember other forms of data. And this has a name. It's called the pictorial superiority effect. And this was written about by John Medina in a wonderful book called Brain Rules. And I'll show you the reference for that at the end. Now, John Medina talks about some research that was conducted in the 1970s, and we're going to do a very small version of that research with you now. All right, so you ready? This is a quick test. I'm going to show you 10 images. Each image will be displayed for 1 second only. And all I'd like you to do is just see if you can remember any of the images that I show you, okay? Do you think you'll be able to remember any of them? Yeah? Okay. Right. Okay? So, I'm now going to show you 2 images, and I'd like you to tell me which one you've seen before. The one on the left or the one on the right, or the top one or the bottom one. Left, yep. Top. Bottom. Bottom. Top. Top, yep. Bottom. Top. 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 Bottom. Okay. Right, so you're probably thinking, so? No? I mean, it's just 10 images, and it was only a few seconds ago that I showed them to you. But if you think about it, if that was any other form of data, if that was written words, or it was sounds, or it was smells, it would be much more difficult to remember. And I could also impress you more, hopefully, by telling you that in the 1970s, they showed a group of people like you 2,500 images. Quite an unfortunate group of people who had to sit through all of those images. 2,500 images. After 2 days, they did the same thing that I did, and they got something like 95% right. Even more impressive, 2 years later, they managed to persuade all those people to come back again, showed them the choice of 2 images again, and they got it something like 63% right. Amazing, isn't it? We've got this amazing ability to remember image. And of course, it's natural that we have that because we need to be able to recognize people. It's such an important thing for us to be able to recognize faces, to be able to recognize foods which are suitable to eat, things like that. So let's, I'll just give you a real example of this from my own school days. When I was a teenager, I had to learn French at school. And I didn't go to France very often. I didn't really have any connection with French. The only connection I had with French was with my course book, which was Longman Audio-Visual French. And I recently was in a second-hand bookshop, and I found this course book. And I felt a real sense of nostalgia finding the course book. And I remember really well the family that were in the course book. It was La Famille Marceau. And there was Monsieur Marceau and Madame Marceau and Jean-Paul and Claudette and Marie-France. And I have to admit that I was also a little bit in love with Marie-France as a teenager. So there was another one. I was kind of thinking, if she asked me to marry her, what should I do? So, do you remember this time? I don't know if anyone's as old as me in the room, but there was a time when it was like they only had green color in the course books. It was black and white or green. Green was the only color. So they're not that amazing, these images. They're very simple images, but they're still quite powerful. And I think I used them to connect the French that I was learning to. So let's work with an image. Here's an image that I found on Google Images just by searching for two people having a conversation. This one came up. And I quite like the sort of story that's in that image. Immediately, when we look at an image like that, we're thinking of story, aren't we? We're thinking of story and we're thinking of relationship. Who are these people? How are they connected? What emotions are there? What's happened? What's going to happen? And there'll be 500 different stories in your heads. Now, but we're not going to create a story exactly. We're going to create a dialogue now. So what I'd like you to do, with the person next to you, I'd like you to very quickly write, and you have to actually write it, a 6-line dialogue. The first line of the dialogue will consist of exactly 6 words. The second line of the dialogue will consist of exactly 5 words. And then 4 words, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1. If you have a contraction, like I'm, or I've, or she's, how many words does that count as? It counts as 1. Okay, so that's a way of manipulating the number of words. All right, I'll give you a couple of minutes to come up with something. Is it already turned on? Is it turned on?
Yes.
Yeah, great. How you getting on?
Pretty difficult.
Yeah?
Yeah, but now I think this is gonna be more difficult for you. Damn. Hey man, how are you doing? Does it count?
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine. What about you? I'm be two things. Are you sure?
Yeah, so that's where suddenly gets interesting. Okay, anybody nearly there? Yeah, you got it? Okay, great. Would you like to just give us your best performance of this? So if I just give you the mic, if one of you could be the girl. Sorry, what are your names?
Tammy.
Tammy?
And Mary. It can be a boy, yes.
No,
You've forgotten your name.
My real name.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Marianne.
Tammy and Marianne. Okay, so we're going to hear this. We're going to hear Tammy and Marianne's version of the dialogue. Would you mind standing up so they can see you?
Okay. You're B, right? I'm B. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, go for it.
What's going on with you?
Oh, I don't know exactly.
Tell me, please, darling.
I'm confused.
Okay, then.
Fine.
Yeah, very good. And very interesting how much meaning can just be expressed with a single word. Fine. Fine, yeah? I mean, you kind of get the feeling that the person isn't fine by the way they say it. And what's the relationship there in that one, do you think? Quite close friends, I would say, yeah.
It's darling.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe very close friends. Yeah, good. Okay, I'll go back up here. So I think obviously I'm not going to do this with you because there's about 500 people in here. But if we were doing this with a class, it's really interesting for different students to hear what other students came up with, because everyone will come up with something different. And there are some interesting things that happen with this. The first book I wrote for CUP was Dialog Activities. And I think there's a very interesting thing that happens when learners create a dialogue, when they write a dialogue. For one thing, it's a very nice mixture of controlled activity, very focused, but also free discussion. So students have to discuss what they're going to write the dialogue about. And I think there's a lot of benefits in having this kind of thing of saying 6 words, 5 words. I noticed that you were all counting. You're going, Now, this wasn't just to kind of annoy you, to make you do this. I think it's a useful thing for learners to do, to start thinking about number of words, because it really raises their awareness about contracted forms, for instance. You know how students often don't use contracted forms because they kind of think it's bad English. And so it's nice to have ways that are going to encourage them to do that. And also ways that encourage them to use ellipsis. When we're speaking naturally, we often miss out lots of words. We don't say, today I am feeling fine. We might just say fine, as in your nice example. Great. So, I talked at the beginning about the project that I run, working with children in Palestine. And what we do with this project is we connect children in refugee camps, mostly in refugee camps in Palestine. We connect them with a team, a pool of volunteers around the world who tell stories. And we use a tool which is a bit like Skype called Zoom in order to do this. But we also encourage children to tell stories. And I'm going to play you in a minute a short video of, this is Sally, and she lives in Gaza, in Beit Hanun in Gaza. And in a minute, she's going to tell you a traditional Palestinian story in English. She's going to tell you just the beginning of it. And it's quite an interesting story because it's a story about a woman who gives birth to a cooking pot. And this is a really, really old story. Now, you can see it says kamishibai up there. Anybody heard of kamishibai? Kamishibai is a storytelling technique which comes from Japan. And in Japanese, it means paper theatre. And in traditional Japanese society, there would be a man with a bicycle, and he would travel around villages in Japan with a box on the back of his bike, and in the box there'd be a set of pictures. So he would stop the bike, get off, gather children around him, and he would tell a story using the pictures. So he'd start telling the story, and then he'd show the picture that goes with the story. I mean, it's the kind of thing we all do as parents to our children. We tell them stories with pictures, and even if they don't understand the language, they get something just by looking at the pictures. Now, we don't have a bicycle in this in the Hands Up project, but we do have PowerPoint. And so this is a kind of high-tech version of Kamishibai using PowerPoint slides. So the learners tell the story, and they show the picture that goes with the relevant part of the story. So if we can just play the beginning of that, and I'll tell you when to stop, please. No?
Once upon a time, there was a woman. She had no children. All of her brothers, sisters, and friends had children, but she had none. This has made she very sad. One day, she looked up sadly and said, "Please, please, let me have a baby. Even if I have to give birth a cooking pot, please, let me have a baby." The woman became pregnant, and she gave birth to a cooking pot, a baby cooking pot. What I'm going to do with you? Everyone was very surprised to see the woman with her baby cooking pot. But the woman loved her and you.
All right, great. So in order to do that, Sally has had to practice that story lots and lots of times. Yeah? I mean, she's really at the edge of her ability to do that. So she's had to practice it. She's had to get support from the teacher or from her colleagues to suggest improvements, perhaps, to improve her pronunciation and the clarity of the message. So I think it's a nice thing for students to do. We think about storytelling being something that the teacher might do, but it's also a very powerful way to empower learners. If we can get our learners telling stories, even at low levels, something very, very useful, I think, is happening there. So, now, of course, these days, it's very easy to find images on something like Google Images, but it's also very easy for learners to bring images into the class. And we had some really lovely examples of that in Ben and Kerry's presentation. So I just want to share with you another activity that I use quite a lot, and for my own language learning, and maybe it's something that you can adapt for your classes. Maybe you're already doing it. So, my French is very rusty. I know La Famille Marceau, and I know Monsieur Marceau, and Claudette, and Marie-France. Ah, Marie-France. But it's very rusty apart from that. So, what I did was I got a friend of mine called Rémi, and I went for a walk with him around the town where I live, and I took a little micro recorder with me. And when we came to different landmarks in the village where I live, I kind of told him something that had happened in that place, and he told me how to say it in French, and then I recorded it in French. So, for instance, here's a place where I was riding my bike across the zebra crossing, and a driver of a car was absolutely furious with me for riding my bicycle across the zebra crossing, because it's a terrible crime in England to do that. To ride your bicycle across a zebra crossing, you could get like 20 years in prison for that crime, yeah? So he was really angry. The driver was really angry. So this is called le chauffeur en colère, the angry driver. Okay, a little bit later, here's a picture of a tree where, now here's a place where one of my sons, he got a frisbee, a really nice frisbee, one of those ones with the hole in the middle. Have you seen them, that you can throw a really long way? And after about 2 minutes of having the frisbee, it was stuck right in the top of the tree. So I had to climb up the tree to get the frisbee down. So this is l'arbre dans lequel je suis monté pour récupérer les frisbees. The tree I had to climb up to get the frisbee from. Here's another place where we were walking along and suddenly a deer jumped out in the river in front of us and swam across the river and climbed out on the other side. And it was, wow, you know, it's one of those moments. So this is called Un cerf a traversé la rivière et moi et Georges, on est vraiment enthousiastes. Okay? Now, the interesting thing for me about this approach is that, like with the images that I've shown you before, I'm able to kind of hang that language on the image. And every time that I walk past these places, and I pretty much walk past them every day, I'm kind of reminded of the French. Now, I don't know about you, but when I've been a teacher, when I've been teaching in places like Brazil, where English isn't the language that's spoken around in the world outside, it can be really difficult to get students to keep language in their heads. They come to class, they study the language in the course books, they do really nice activities, but when the class finishes, the books close, and they go away and they forget about everything. That can happen, can't it? So here's a way of kind of putting the language into the world of the students. So if you get students to bring photos in of their journey to school, or places they've been, their holiday pictures, or something like that, and try and get them to talk about them in English, could be a very useful activity. Also, this is a way of putting the language that students are learning into the worlds of the learners, but it's also a way of bringing the outside world into the class. And again, we had some really nice examples of that with Ben and Kerry's talk. So, you know, it's a way of just making a connection between the classroom and the world outside. So, this isn't a new technique. This idea of linking language to physical places is probably the oldest memory technique around, and it's called the loci memory technique. And if you ever want to try it, it's a very interesting thing. If you just think of a route that you know really, really well, and then think of some words that you, and all the different landmarks along that route, and you try to connect some language to different places, you'll remember them really, really well. I mean, you could do it for remembering your shopping list, for instance, or you could do it for remembering countries in Asia, or lots of different things it could be used for, but also it could be used for language learning. And this is the person who is supposed to have developed this technique, Simonides, 25 centuries ago. Now, what we're doing here is we're linking memory and imagination. I mean, one nice thing about the technique with the pictures in French is that I don't actually have to see the pictures in order to remember the language. I'm a terrible insomniac, and I quite often lie in bed at night trying to get to sleep. And one thing I can do when I'm trying to get to sleep is I can go back through all of those places on my route and try and remember the language. So there's also a role of imagination in here. We don't actually have to see the image, we just need to see it in our mind's eye. Earl Stevick, one of my huge heroes in language teaching, someone whose work has inspired me massively, wrote a very interesting article which is accessible online, free. It's called Imagination and Memory, Friend or Foe. Now, sometimes when we think of imagination and memorization, we think of them as being at two ends of a spectrum. Like, we've got over here learning by heart, memorization. We think of that as being very old-fashioned, very traditional mode of education. And then over here, we've got this idea of creativity, imagining things, working with fluency, this type of idea. Now, in a way, what people like Stevick have said is that actually there's a very powerful link between these two things. And what are they called? Brain people. I can't think of the right word now. They're saying there's actually that imagination and memorization run along the same neural pathways in our brains. So in fact, we all know this, don't we? One of the most powerful ways to remember something is to create an image in our head to remember it. Let's have a look at some practical examples. Here's a word which probably every student in Brazil knows. How does the baby feel? Happy. The baby feels happy. And what's the baby wearing? Yeah, and he's an English baby. He's not an American baby, he's an English baby. So what's he wearing? A nappy. So he's happy and he's wearing a nappy. And here is a man who's having a short sleep. He's not having a long sleep, he's having a very short sleep. What's he doing? He's having a nap. So here we've got a word that is a known word, but we're getting some other words for free because they have a sound that's connected. And we're getting learners to create an image to link those sounds together and therefore to remember them. Maybe that's a powerful way of teaching a word like nappy. Let's look at another example. Here we've got a sock, and the sock is moving towards the socket. So we've got sock, socket. And what's going to happen? Shock. There might be a shock. Or maybe the sock is being sucked towards the socket, and there'll be a shock. So I think anything we can do to link words through form. So we don't often do that, do we? Course books often link words through meaning, words of similar meaning. But maybe if we think about memory, I mean, I'm just a bit obsessed with memory, but I think that it's a very powerful way to sometimes link words that have a similar form together. I mean, I was teaching a group and the word peas came up, the vegetable peas. And I was thinking, how can I help the learners to remember that word? So just the simple thing, peas, please. Peas, please. Yesterday, when I was doing this talk in Rio, somebody came up to me and she said, your grey hair is great. So there's that other thing, grey, great. Anything that we can do as teachers to make learners make those connections, I think is powerful. Great. So let's have a look at this. Here's a sentence from a course book to teach language from the 19th century. The philosopher pulled the lower jaw of the hen. The philosopher pulled the lower jaw of the hen. It's probably not a sentence that you will find in interchange. or in any course book that's been published in the last 100 years, I would imagine. It's a very unusual sentence, contains very low-frequency language. You're more likely to see a sentence like this, something like that. Yeah, the man went to the shop near his house. And it's great. I mean, the communicative approach has really emphasized the importance of natural, high-frequency uses of language like this. But I can almost guarantee that when you read that first sentence, some kind of image popped into your head, didn't it? Didn't you imagine a philosopher, maybe with a beard, a stereotype image of a philosopher, sort of bending down, and then there's a chicken or a hen, and he's just grabbing hold of the jaw and pulling down the jaw of the hen. So, of course, we don't want our course books to be filled with rare, crazy examples like that, but I'm just making the point that this is highly memorable. You might remember that sentence. You might not remember that one. So I think we should not ignore the possibilities for surreal uses of language, creative uses of language. One of the first things I learned in Brazil, I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about Portuguese, that it's very poetic and it's very creative, the way that people use language. One of the first things I learned in Brazil when I arrived here was uma cerveja estupidamente gelada. And, I mean, it's a very creative use of language, isn't it? It's not, and it sticks, that kind of thing. I mean, it could just be because I like beer quite a lot, that I remembered it. Okay, so we're going to put this into practice now. Can anyone tell me what the missing word is?
Music.
Ah, yeah, it could be, if it didn't have work on the end. Music to my ears, yeah. But something to my ears in work. Up to my ears in work. What does that mean? A lot of work. Up to my ears in work. If we want our learners to remember something like that, maybe a good way of helping them is to get them to create an image that goes with it. So here's an image that was created by a Chinese learner of English. This is an adult learner of English, up to my ears in work. I mean, this poor guy is literally up to his ears in work. It's almost like cutting into his ear. So, there's a wonderful book it's not published by Cambridge. I hope I can still mention it. But it's a wonderful book written by Scott Thornbury, who's the series editor for the Handbooks for Language Teachers series by Cambridge. And the book is called Natural Grammar. And natural grammar has a lot of these kind of chunks of language. So it takes a key word and then it looks at all of the chunks of language that exist around that word. So we're going to do an activity now. And before we do the activity, I'd like you to write down a number between 0 and 13. Pick any number you like between 0 and 13. Just write it down. Okay? You've done it? So, I'm going to now show you 12 sentences, or 12 chunks of language, and they all contain the word up. And what I'd like you to do is look at the chunk of language that corresponds to the number you wrote down, and then just try and draw it somehow. Do a really simple, quick image to somehow represent your sentence or your chunk. Okay, don't spend a long time on it. Just do it as quickly as you can. Okay, and then when you've done that, when you've done it, can you just turn to somebody near you and show them the image and see if they can work out which sentence it represents or which chunk it represents?
Já tenho meu plano B, cara, vou tudo mais falei. Você é esquetista de delegacia de polícia.
Can you move up a bit, please? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm.
Você sempre ficou suspeito da mesma coisa. Você já viu o retrato falar?
Upside down. Yeah.
Como é que consegue pegar alguém com o retrato?
Aha! Now I can see cutting up the cake. Okay. Great. Now, when I do this activity with students, what I usually do is give each pair of students one of the chunks on a piece of paper. They turn over the paper and they draw an image on the other side. And then what we do is we stick all of the images around the room, and the students go around the room and they try and work out what the chunk is for each image. So what we're doing really is we are creating some flashcards, student-created flashcards. And I mean, we could do it with anything. We could do it, this is obviously for kind of quite higher levels. We could do it with simple food vocabulary. We could do it with verbs, activities. We could do it with things you find in a town. Lots of different areas of vocabulary or grammar that we could use this with. So I'm going to show you some examples that were done by my group of Chinese learners of English, and I'll see if you can work out what the picture is. Number 2. Number 3. Right. I'm going to show you that one in a minute. Well, does anyone know what that means? She's chatting him up. Chatting him up is what I was too scared to do with Alison Close when I was 10 years old. So I didn't make any advance on her. I didn't approach her. I didn't tell her that I really liked her. You know, so it's kind of, what's another word for it? Maybe flirting. It's like flirting. It's like, what do you say when you flirt with somebody? Do you say things like, I don't know what you say. Do you say things like, do you come here often? No one says that, do they? No one says that anymore. Yeah. So do you get the idea? Yeah. So I'll show you the picture and you tell me which one you think it is. Picking up litter. Yep. Nice drawing, isn't it, that one? Yeah. And it's hard because this man's only got one arm, so it's actually particularly hard to pick up the litter, but he's managing it anyway, which is fantastic. What about this one? Given up smoking. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's experienced this, where some really insensitive person, you know, you've just given up smoking, someone really insensitive just comes and smokes a giant cigarette right behind you. I mean, this looks pretty bad. It looks like he's suffering, huh? How about this one? Upside down. I mean, I love like the creativity of learners. You know, I'm not sure why there's a duck in the glass, but there is one, and maybe that's helped the learner to remember it. What about this one? You know this one? She's chatting him up. She's flirting with him. This beautiful, beautiful woman is chatting up this very handsome man. And I think actually this is a picture of Alison Close's mother chatting me up when I was a kid. And as you can see, there's kind of, I'm not sure what's coming out of the person's mouth there, but he looks. Yeah. Yeah. I'd never noticed that before. Yeah. One eye is heart-shaped. It's beautiful. Never noticed that before. So, just a little bit of theory, or just a little bit of a reflection. All of the images are very powerful for storing language, but it's also important to go back to those images. So if we have those flashcards that the students have created, maybe in a future class we show the flashcards again and see if they can remember the language. There's an interesting study done by Rodiger and Karpika in, can't remember when, 2008. And they looked at two different groups of learners, and one group of learners were constantly learning new things, constantly focusing on new language. Another group of learners were constantly going back to what they'd learnt and testing themselves on what they'd learnt. And the group that were constantly testing themselves or retrieving language did significantly better than the other group. So it's important, I think, that we remember it's not just about storing language, it's also about retrieving it, going back to it and trying to remember it. So, whoops. So, I'd just like to show you a picture that I've drawn. As you can see, I'm not quite at sort of Picasso level. I mean, I once had to do a drawing. I was working with a group of learners, and the word lobster came up in the class. One of the students said, "What's lobster?" And I said, and this is before, like, the internet, before Google Images. So I said, he said, just draw it on the board. So I went up to the board and I started drawing a lobster, and the student went, yeah, monkey. Monkey, yeah. So no. So, we went through every animal that you could possibly imagine. In the end, I think I just ended up miming the lobster, because that was easier. Very interesting. I once went to a talk at IATEFL, about 20 years ago, maybe, quite a long time ago, where somebody was talking about the power of drawing. And he was talking about the power of drawing when you're not very good at drawing. Because he said, if we get students to draw things, and it's not very clear what it is, it creates a very powerful need for people to communicate. Because you really want people to understand your drawings. So, I'm going to tell you about this drawing. I did this in a hotel, in the hotel where I'm staying at the moment. And I just did it quite quickly, as you can see. So this is a picture of my grandfather. And my grandfather died about 20 years ago. He was a wonderful man. In fact, he died while I was in Brazil. And he was a farmer, my grandfather. And he was an incredibly strong man. Did anyone know what that is up there? No. See how much language we can create with bad drawings? It's not deliberate, of course. But so this is a picture of a bale of straw. You know how you have with the string around it? And my grandfather was incredibly strong. He used to be able to pick up 4 bales of straw and carry them around like this. really strong. And I couldn't even lift up one, as a child. You know what animal this is? No. It's a cow. It's a cow. It's not a goat. It's not a goat. It's a cow. It's got four teats here. It's a cow. We have cows like this in England. Yeah? So, my grandfather was a fantastic judge of cattle. People used to ask his advice about cattle and say, should I buy this one or this one? And he knew, that if you had a good cow like that, he would always be able to know. My grandfather was a very fussy eater. He was a very conservative about his food. Do you know what this is? No. No. This is English pineapple. See, in England we have, we generally eat pineapple from a tin, and it's got a ring, a pineapple ring. My grandfather ate tinned pineapple every day of his life when I knew him for dessert. Tinned pineapple and ice cream. He ate that every day of his life. He lived quite long, so maybe there's a diet there. The pineapple and ice cream diet. I don't know. Okay, right, I'd like you to do the same. Now, as you can see, I'm not very good at drawing. And you might think, I don't like drawing. But I think we could think of drawing as just another tool that's available to us to help our learners remember language and to help them communicate. So what I'd like you to do very quickly, I'd like you to do a quick drawing of someone important in your life. It could be someone who's around now. It could be someone who's passed away. It could be someone from your childhood. It could be your teacher. It could be your wife, your husband, your son, your daughter, your mother-in-law, whatever you like. And also draw a few things around the picture of things that person likes or is interested in. Okay, you've got like 1 minute to do it. Okay, and now can I ask you to turn to the person near you and just use your picture as a way to talk about them, as a starting point. So tell them about your person using the picture. Yeah, good drawing. Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, wow. Is that your husband? Yeah. He's very handsome. He's quite young. He's very young as well, isn't he? So you're doing husband comparison. My husband is more handsome than... Uh-huh. So you've Is that your wife? No? Daughter? Your grandmum. But she looks so young there. Yeah, she looks really young. Yeah, great. Okay. Now, so this is very much. I'm going to have to, with students, we might need a lot of time, but I just want to rush you through this now. When we're working with learners, this could be a very nice fluency activity. And it's that idea of bringing somebody from the classroom, from the outside world into the classroom. And by doing that, perhaps you're making the language memorable. So you've all got all excited now. Now, of course, we could also use this as a kind of controlled activity. Like the teacher could perhaps dictate some words to the learners. You know, maybe some adjectives, maybe words like obsessive, shy, hardworking, friendly. Maybe if the word connects to your person, if you think your person is like that, you write it next to them. If your person is not like that, you write the word a long way away. So it's a way of kind of reviewing language. Now, this idea of drawing, I just want to end with going back to my work with the Hands Up project. One of the things that we do is so simple that it's almost not worth saying, but at the same time, I think it's one of the most powerful and empowering things we can do with children. And that is telling children stories, getting them to listen to the story, and then to draw something from the story. So they draw an image of something that they think of in the story, anything they like. I'm going to show you an example. This is Taufik, 12-year-old boy in Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. I've just told him a traditional Palestinian story called Johar and the Meat. And he's now, all the kids have drawn pictures, and he's now taking his picture up to the webcam, and we're talking about his drawing. So I'll just show you the very beginning of that, please.
Hi, Taufik.
Hello.
Hello, Taufik. How are you doing?
Fine.
Yeah?
And how-
I'm
And
fine.
you?
I'm fine, thanks. Yeah. I'm fine, thanks. Wow. Hey, nice. Wow, Taufik. That's an amazing picture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. I love the colours in there. Really bright colours.
Yeah.
Taufik, do you want to tell me about the picture? What's happening in the picture?
The Johar
Yeah.
stay cat.
Skills.
Yes.
Cat.
Uh-huh.
Skills in the cat.
Yes.
And okay.
Three kills.
Uh-huh. That's
Okay.
great. What?
Oh, what happened there? Oh, that's it. I'm just cutting it there because we're sort of running out of time. But you can see that the connection, or the internet connection, is very weak. The picture is very blurred. And that's because in Gaza, they have very limited electricity at the moment. Some places only 2 hours a day. And the internet signal is often very weak. But the connection that can be made between someone outside of Gaza and somebody in Gaza doing an activity like that, I think is very powerful. And I also think it's very memorable for children and also for the teacher who's doing it, in this case, me. If there is someone who is interested in getting involved in the Hands Up project, we have, as I said at the beginning, a pool of volunteers all around the world. We have a woman in Mexico who gets up at 5 a.m. to tell stories through the internet to a group of children in Gaza. She has to do it at 5 a.m. because of the time difference, because it's such a big time difference. And we also connect classrooms. So we have a class in southern Brazil, a group of kids in southern Brazil who make videos of their life, and another group near Ramallah in Palestine, and they make videos of things in their lives, and they share their videos on a Facebook group, and it all happens in English. So anyone's interested, please come and talk to me at the end, and I'll give you a card, and I'll tell you how you can get more involved. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Nick, and welcome. I hadn't seen you yet.
No, thank
nice
you.
seeing you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you for a wonderful closing lecture. Thank you all. And I will switch to Portuguese because now we have a pre-closing. Nós mudamos pouquinho.